Welcome back to Leadership Lab, where we delve into the minds of top business and leadership experts. I'm your host, Sarah Wolf, and today I am absolutely thrilled to have my friend Dr. Alan Barnard with us. Dr. Barnard is a world-renowned decision scientist, theory of constraints expert, and the founder of Goldrat Research Labs. And he is passionate about helping individuals and organizations make better, faster decisions and achieve incredible results. Welcome, Dr. Barnard.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Sarah. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening to your audience.
Yes, thank you. I am so excited to have you on. We've been talking about this for a little while now, and so I am so glad we're able to make it happen. I'm excited for my audience to get to know you and a little about the work that you're doing, because it's incredible. So I'm excited to dive in today. I just wanted to
Thank you.
Start by saying that you're really known for simplifying complex business concepts. And one of the topics that I know you're passionate about is helping businesses bridge the gap between revenue and profit. In fact, you're quite passionate about this idea of turning top line revenue into bottom line and setting a target that's so ambitious it feels impossible. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about your ideas behind this concept.
Sure. I think it's one of the most interesting things about most businesses is that, obviously it's troubling if a business is not growing. But many businesses grow, and the mistake I often see is they grow their top line, their revenues, at the same rate as what they are growing their costs. And when you have those two curves running in parallel, so you're growing your revenue at the same rate at what you're growing your cost, you are growing your profit in absolute terms, but not in percentage terms. So essentially your net profit margin stays the same. And that misses out on a massive opportunity. If you could find a way of growing your revenue faster and maybe much faster than your profits, that's when you start to unlock value. Real value. So that's kind of the thing that I started getting passionate about. Is I was noticing that many businesses, not just small businesses, but even large businesses, were making this fundamental mistake where, yes, they were achieving sales growth, but they were growing costs fast at the same rate or sometimes faster than what they were growing revenues. I want to give you just a simple example to give you an indication. You can grow your revenues in two ways, right? You can increase your price, making sure that the product or the service that you provide is so valuable that you could justify charging a premium price, or you could just sell more volume, right? Sell the same product or service to more customers at the same price. I want to share with the audience just in terms of why I'm so excited about the leverage. If you could find a way of growing revenue at a rate faster than growing cost. So think about a small business, maybe you're doing $100,000 in revenues, and at the moment you've got a net profit of $5,000. It could be that you're doing $100 million in revenue and have a profit of $5 million. Same math applies, right? So on the 100 million, think about growing your revenue by just 1%. So you're going to go from 100 to 101. What will be the impact on net profit? We think that because we have a 5% profit margin, that is what will happen. My net profit will go up by the equivalent amount. But if I can do that by increasing my average selling price by just 1%, right? My variable cost won't go up. My operating expenses won't go up. So that whole one on the 100,000, so say 1,000 of the 100,000 will drop to my bottom line. Take my profit from 5,000 to 6,000, or from 5 million to 6 million. That's a 20% increase in net profit for every 1% growth I can get if I can grow my revenue through increasing the average price. And that doesn't necessarily mean increasing my price. It just means maybe not giving away so much discount. or selling direct to my customer rather than through an intermediary so I can keep that. If I couldn't do that, if I had to grow it by volume, and say my variable cost is 50%, so I'm still growing the revenue by 1%, so that's 1,000 on 100,000. Half of that will drop to my bottom line, right? So I'm increasing my bottom line from 5,000 to 5,500. That's a 10% increase in profit for every 1%. So that's why I'm a little bit nerdy in that I absolutely love mathematics and thinking about how to solve really complex problems with simple solutions. But part of it always starts with just what is the potential out there? And that's what I want to leave maybe as an introduction for business owners out there, is that the potential to grow your net profit much, much faster than what you're growing your revenue is substantial. 1% can give you 10 or 20% growth in net profit, and most business owners miss that. Yes,
and that can take quite a long time to achieve the goals that you ultimately want to do if we're only increasing it by that 1%. And so that's where you come with this idea of creating targets so big it almost feels impossible. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I like to talk about moving from 10% to 10x, or from 100% to 100x, right? If you want to grow your business and you want to do it by growing your business, say 10% per year, right? So take your business, it's maybe a $10,000 business or $10 million business. You want to grow it by 10% per year. So next year, rather than 10, you'll have sales of 11. If you increase that by 10% per year, and you are going to be increasing your net profit also by 10%. So you're growing your revenues and costs at the same rate, which is the fundamental mistake I just spoke about, right? To get to 2x, just to take your revenues from 10 to 20 is going to take you 8 years to achieve. To get your net profit from 1 to 2, that's a 2x, will take you 8 years. To get it to 10x, get your revenues from 10 to 100, or your profit from 1 to 10, it's going to take you 25 years. Like most businesses feel that it's realistic to set targets of 10% improvement per year, 10% growth in revenue, 10% growth in net profit, right? It's going to take 25 years to get to 10x. If you could just change that and you say, well, capitalizing on what I've just mentioned, to think about how do I grow my revenues faster and maybe substantially faster than what I'm growing costs, because I'm focusing on offering additional value that allows me to reduce the discounts or maybe even charge a premium. If I can just grow my top line by 25% per year, and I grow my OPEX, my cost, by only 5%, because I'm only focusing on those areas that are currently bottlenecks, right? I'm not adding more capacity everywhere, just in my bottlenecks. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about bottlenecks and period constraints later. But just that change, going from 10% increases in revenues and profits to 25% increases in revenues, you can 2x your business in 1 year. In terms of profit, right? And you can get to 10x in just 5 years. Go from 1 million to 10 million profit in just 5 years compared to 25 years. And that's the idea here, is that, you know, you want to set ambitious targets and understand the mathematics behind it. That's a really important thing. And understanding that often our goals become self-fulfilling prophecies, right? But there's another element to it that, to me, is even more important than understanding the maths and knowing what the potential is. I was, a few years ago, I was interviewed on the stage by Joe Polish for his Genius Network Mastermind. And before he interviewed me, he was asking the audience the question to say, while we're waiting for everything to set up, can you think of 3 ways to increase your net profit by 10%? And, everybody was writing down, and then he turned to me and he said, Alan, what do you think about my question? And I said, Joe, I think it's a terrible question. And he's like, why? Why is it such a terrible question? I've always been asking that question. And I asked him, and I want your audience to think about the same, right? Whether it's their business or their life. How many ways are there to improve your business or your life by 10%? There are many, 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 many ways. So if our goal as a business owner or just somebody that wants to improve our own life is to find the one thing that if we could change that will change everything, then asking how to achieve a 10% improvement is a really bad question. You should ask yourself, how do I achieve a 10x improvement? Because there's probably very few and maybe only one way to do that. And that's the answer that you're looking for, right? Is that one thing that even if I'm only 20% successful, I'm still going to get a 2x improvement rather than a 10% improvement. So that's what I'm talking about, is encouraging your audience to think not percentage, but multiplication, moving from 10% to 10x.
Yeah. So how do we switch gears? Because that's normally what we like to think about, or, we have this idea or this fear of making a wrong decision or a bad decision, fear of failure. So how do we switch our mindset to that?
Well, I developed a very simple technique that I hope would be useful, right? So why don't we go for 10x? Most of the time it's because we think it's impossible. And as soon as we think something is impossible, there's 2 negative consequences for that belief. And I will call it a limiting belief, right? First thing is we won't try, so we'll never know. But even worse, we won't even think about trying, right? And to me, thinking about trying is to say, well, what if I asked myself, it's impossible to achieve a 10x improvement in my business or my life unless, and now you allow your mind to answer that question. Because if you can find the unless conditions, you will find how to turn the impossible into the possible. And again, I can refer the story with Joe Polish just to give a practical example, right? He asked me, so how do I apply this 10x impossible unless to myself? I said, well, do you have a goal for yourself? He said, yes. He's just written a book and he wants to sell, 10,000 copies of this book. I said, okay, what would be an impossible goal for you? He said, well, actually 10,000 is quite conservative. I'd love to sell 100,000. I said, well, do you think it's possible? He said, yes, probably with a lot of hard work. I said, what would be impossible? He said, 1 million copies. I said, great. So now we've done step 1. We've increased the magnitude of your goal, right? To an extent that you say it's impossible. Or you could reduce the time to achieve your goal. That could, again, be for business, could be personal, right? Find my soulmate or lose the amount of weight or start my own business. Right. You could make a goal impossible by increasing the magnitude or reducing the time you give yourself. That's step 1. Make the goal impossible. Because when you do, and then you ask step 2, the question is impossible unless, you allow your mind to solve that problem. So at least you will try. And when I asked Joe that question, I said, selling 1 million books is impossible unless, and I could see he started sort of laughing. He said, okay, now I get it, right? If I could get somehow on Oprah Winfrey's book club, bam. Now it gives you something tangible. Now you ask, well, how do I get on Oprah Winfrey's book club, right? Okay. Number 2, what else can be, right? If I could get Tony Robbins to promote it to his millions of followers, right? Or Taylor Swift, right? Come on, right. Whoever's your hero, right? But that's the idea, is that setting a goal that's so ambitious that you think is impossible really helps the mind. When you think it's realistic, you think you already know how to do it, which means that you will not think out of the box. So
And
you
keep
have
yourself
to
in the
say that.
same, and
Exactly.
never growing to those exponential places that you truly are wanting, desiring, but
Absolutely.
sticking with
And
it.
that's why practically, together with my mentor, Dr. Ellie Goldberg, we developed this idea of how to challenge business owners to think about impossible goals. And one practical way is think about your current revenue. Maybe I have a business that's 1 million in revenues, and I'm doing 50,000 in net profit, and set a goal to turn your top line into your bottom line. So in some reasonable period of time, 3 to 4 years, can I make my net profit to be 1 million? I'm turning my top line, my revenue, into my net profit. And then if that's, that's typically a 10x or more improvement in net profit. And then when I say, well, that's impossible, to just ask yourself, it's impossible unless.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And those are less moments. I think I've had a few of those, but not necessarily in the moment, but it may be oftentimes in the shower or doing something completely not related to what I'm trying to find that solution for, but I'm opening my mind up to, like you said, search for those solutions. And so
Yes.
then from there, knowing that, okay, now that this solution is appeared to me, now what's that very next step that I can take? And so the path begins to illuminate and steps become, you can see where you might need to go to begin that process.
Right. And I think that's a great point. You have to ask yourself the right question. There's a wonderful quote that says, the top mentors, the top coaches are not the ones that give you the answer to your question. They are the ones that challenges you to ask the right question.
Yes.
And the right question is often, how do I 10x? How do I achieve something that I think is impossible? And then ask yourself, it's impossible unless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So good. And oftentimes we know what that is, and we just need to ask that right question so that it
Yes.
comes to the surface. I'd love to talk a little bit about, and you and I have discussed this too, especially because of particularly my audience and the women that I work with. And, many women, business leaders and entrepreneurs, we struggle with this decision fatigue, this idea of decision fatigue. We wear all these different hats, and we're in constant decision making, whether we're making decisions, for our families, for our partners, for, our homes, and also, how to grow our businesses in a way that we feel is fruitful and successful. So, how would you say that this decision fatigue, that this, this thing that we wrestle with impacts our businesses, and what can we do to kind of overcome that or make it more simplified, I guess?
It's a great question, and I want to expand your question a little bit. I think we should cover, there are 4 things that I think, yes, are general obstacles for everybody to achieve what we think might be impossible life goals, whether it's to make the impact that we always wanted, to 100x our impact or to 100x our income. There's 4 obstacles that we face, and they are especially relevant for women. The first one is the one that you mentioned, which is decision fatigue. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but remind me to talk about the other 3, which is imposter syndrome, fear of failure, but then also surprisingly fear of success. So let's cover the first one that you mentioned, which is decision fatigue. So there was a very interesting research project that was done to try and find out what causes a parole board judge to grant parole. And they ran the data, and to their shock and horror, what they found out that was in the mornings when the court starts, on average, 60% of offenders are granted parole. Just before lunch, it goes down to almost 0.
Wow.
And they first thought maybe it's a way that the court schedules, the offenders. Maybe they give all the easy cases first thing in the morning, and then and it was totally random. There was something else at play. And then it would bump up after lunch. It would go up to about 40%. But again, towards the end of the day, it would be close to zero. And what they realized was it's called decision fatigue. When we are demanding our attention, which is our scarcest resource, right? It's not our limited time or knowledge or money. It's our limited attention. The demand on our attention will always exceed our available attention. Decisions, especially important ones, puts a demand on our attention. So what happens if we are overloaded with decisions? Essentially, the mind gets fatigued. And over time, it will start defaulting to the safest possible decision. And in their case, the safest possible decision was not to grant parole, right? For many of us, often the safest decision is not to decide now.
Right.
So it's one of the reasons why we keep on procrastinating.
Yes.
Not because we're lazy or we lack information. It's simply because the mind are so overwhelmed that we can't make any more decisions, especially if we realize how consequential it will be if we get it right or wrong.
Right.
What makes this more challenging for women is, again, it's a generalization, so please don't judge me for it, but it's a true generalization, I think, is that most women, and maybe all of them, on average, have to make many more decisions than men. Right? You just think about getting ready in the morning, right? For an average woman, there's so many options that they have to consider. Where am I going to be that day? What's going to be appropriate to wear? How should my hair be? My makeup? All of those things that for men don't feature, right?
Everything I did this morning. You just
exactly, right? So just that puts already a tremendous load on my cognitive capacity. And then it's like, how to get to work? Where must I do all the stops? Who are all the people? Because you're not just worried about you, right? You're worried about the kids and the parents and the co-workers and everybody else, right? So all of those decisions puts a tremendous load. And as a result, you default more and more towards making more and more safer decisions, which either is taking decisions that are no risk involved or just delaying the decision, kicking the ball down the road. So that's something that my advice would be, whatever of those things you can automate, right? Try to do it. You see very successful people do that, like the kind of Steve Jobs, where they wear the same outfit, or you pre-arrange maybe on a Sunday, right? You pre-arrange all your outfit for the whole week. So in the moment you get up, you get your coffee, you step into your clothes, and you go, right? That by itself can free up the mind to make better, faster decisions, take on more risks without being reckless, etc.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And why is it different for men and women? Is it
It's
men?
just
You don't struggle with that?
decisions, the amount of decisions that are being made by women exceed by a factor of about 10x that of men. Right. So just the loading is there. And then when you're considering all the other things that typically women feel more responsible for, in terms of bringing up kids, looking after everybody, ensuring that there's harmony, etc. Those things that require social skills also put a much greater load on our cognitive capacity.
Yeah. So what are the best ways for us to identify those things that we should automate, or do you put in a different space than what we're constantly having to do on a daily basis?
Yeah, there's very interesting. We make about 35,000 decisions every single day. 35,000, right? As I mentioned, there's a substantial increase between men and women, but that's kind of the average. That's sort of for a typical woman. So what my advice would be is to start just making a list of all the decisions that you're making every day that is taking you time, that you haven't automated, right? We have, for those that have maybe have read the work of Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner in economics. He wrote that beautiful book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Unfortunately, he passed away just a couple of weeks back. But he said that we have two ways of making decisions, of thinking. System one, which is fast and automatic, and system two, which is slow and deliberate. And we make most of our decisions in that fast and automatic mode because it saves us time and cognitive capacity. Of course, we can make a mistake in that when we do it in automatic mode, when we really should have reflected on it, right? Or we reflect on it when we should have done it in the fast and automatic mode. And that's where the opportunity is for reducing the amount of decisions. Like I said, if you realize that on a daily basis, what to wear, what to eat, what to cook, all the type of things that you say, can I find a way of automating that? Or batching the decision and making them for the next week, right? So writing down all the big decisions that you're making that's taking some of your time, writing them down and asking yourself, how can I automate this, or who can I outsource this decision to make? You know, very successful people, you'll often find, both men and women, they'll get into a restaurant as something as simple as selecting something on the menu, and I'll say, you decide from it. Right? Or let the waiter decide. They know best. It's just a part of just outsourcing or automating the things that you don't want to spend your limited capacity on making because it's inconsequential.
Yeah, it's so good. So helpful. And to systematize, to automate, to delegate are so important, but often difficult for women to do as well, to, let go of some of those things, because I know many of myself, I will speak for myself. I have that issue, I guess, where I feel like I can do it all. I need to do it all, but it ends up, impacting me in a negative way in the long run. Because like you said, I then am overwhelmed with all of the decisions I have to make, all of the things that I have to do. So I end up either, like you said, usually kicking the ball down the court and eventually having to get to it. And then, feeling like, oh my gosh, why didn't I start this sooner? Or realizing it wasn't as big of a task as I thought it was, but just because of all the other things, it felt surmountable at the time. So it's great feedback. I'd love to touch on the other three that you had mentioned as well. So let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome.
Sure. I think a very interesting way of thinking about imposter syndrome, Tony Robbins is certainly one that I've heard talk about that, but there's other psychologists that have also talked about it, is to say it's really just a different name for the other two that I mentioned, for fear of failure and fear of success, right? The simplest way to overcome imposter syndrome is there's this principle in science called one case is a proof, right? It came from this idea of black swans, right? You could be a scientist and go and observe swans all over the world. And for the last 1,000 times that you've observed them, every time you look at swans, they're always white. So at some point you say, oh, all swans are white. I'm feeling more and more confident that in fact, all swans are white. Until you go to Australia and you see a black swan, one case, and your whole hypothesis is gone, right?
Yes.
So think about that in terms of imposter syndrome. As I'm feeling like an imposter because there's something that's different about me that makes me feel like I'm not fitting in. Everybody else looks different, right? It could be it's an all-male world and I'm the only woman, right? Or it's an all-white world and I'm the only black person, or the opposite, right? I'm playing basketball and everybody's black and I'm the only short white guy, right? So there's something that makes me feel like an imposter that immediately changes the way I'm looking at my own potential, right? And that's really bad. It's like when I'm feeling like I'm not fitting in, I'm sort of lowering my expectations. And often people around me also lower their expectations of me, and that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the next time it happens, I want to challenge your audience to use this one case as a proof thinking that says, am I really the first one of my type that is trying to be successful in this field? Because if I can only come up with just one example of somebody that was similar to me, and despite all the discrimination and the additional obstacles, etc., still made it work, then why can't I?
Wow. Yeah, you said it's just that proof, that case, that one example that can change your whole
Yeah. But
whole
you know
outlook.
what the sad situation is? Guess what we often do when we find that one case?
What's that?
We come up with excuses of why they made it and we won't.
Interesting.
Right? Oh, they had wealthy parents, they were well educated, or, like a horrible one that I often hear, which is so sad to hear other women talk about. Oh, she slipped her way to the top. That's how she got to the top. Something that, oh, she was doing or he was doing, that gave them an unfair advantage. And often that's not the case. They just worked hard. They said, I deserve to be here. And yes, I might not know much, but I'm going to learn fast. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to try to make smart decisions, and use what assets I've got to my advantage. But that's the thing is to look at all these people that was the first imposter, right? And ask yourself, why could they do it, right? You think about somebody like Oprah Winfrey, right? It's like, wow. One of the wealthiest women in the world, probably had some of the worst starting conditions you could ever imagine, and yet she made it.
Oh, that's right.
That's one case as a proof that I shouldn't feel like an imposter. If somebody has already walked the road in front of me, I should study them and find out what they did that I could replicate.
So what do you do when these thoughts of not being good enough or this fear of failure, they start to come into your mind? Because that often comes into play with imposter syndrome. Not only the fact that we might be different, or we've come from a different background, or we didn't have the same leverage, or those types of things, but
I want to give you kind of a fun answer, which is what I do for myself, because none of us are immune to this, right? We all have limiting assumptions. We all get scared. We fear failure. We fear success. Is I try to ask myself in my most sarcastic tone of voice, whenever that thought comes up, I go, really? Really?
I like the little inflection there.
Yeah,
Really?
really? I'm really the first at this? Really? Nobody else has done this before? Really? I can't do this. I'm not good at public speaking. Really? I need to speak in public mostly, and I'm okay with that. So what's the difference if I'm speaking to one person or 10,000? I'm just telling my story. So that's kind of a fun way of just doing it, is we have to, first of all, verbalize the assumption or belief that's blocking us. And then ask ourselves, really, is that really true?
Yeah, so it's questioning that doubt with a little bit of doubt.
Exactly. I think that, I don't know if you're aware of the work of Byron Katie, but she's got a beautiful framework. It's called The Work, right? Says, like, come up with that assumption or belief, like, this person does this to me, right? Or I'm not good at this. And then ask, is that true? How do I absolutely know it's true? It's kind of the equivalent of really, right? Because you're asking yourself that question where normally we just accept it as true, right? Now I'm asking myself, is it true? So I'm thinking about the best example, and then she goes, is it really true? How would you know? And then the question, which is so powerful, how do you feel? How do you react when you believe that thought? Right? That I'm an imposter, that I'm just not good at something. Right? How does it make you feel? How do you react? And how would you react and feel if the opposite was true? And you could take this quite deep very quickly, right? It's like, I'm unlovable, right? That's why I haven't found a partner yet. Is that true? Really? Because you just need one case, one person that has loved you before to challenge that assumption, to get rid of it completely, right?
That's great.
And then you can think of some more examples, and that's what she encourages. Think of some more example. How can you turn it around? So that to me is a kind of a general solution for all of these fears that we have, is start by clearly verbalizing it. What am I actually scared of? And then say, is that true? Because often in our imagination, the worst case is much worse than what can really happen, right? You think about a simple example, like I was a nerd at school. I never had a girlfriend. I was terrified of asking a girl to dance, right? Until one day I asked myself, what's the worst that can happen? And in that moment, I felt so ashamed, because what's the worst that can happen? Practically speaking, she'll probably say no, right?
You're not going to die.
I have to ask it in a really creepy way for her to slap me. But then I'll know, okay, that's not a good way to ask it, right? And it's, I think the same thinking is true. It's like, what am I really scared of? Can that really happen? And how can I avoid it?
Yeah. I just noticed that I have rays of sunshine now hovering
I
over.
know. And they will be
I feel like the hallelujah chorus needs to happen in behind.
Yeah. Yes. I think just as to close off, as you know, I think we're all familiar with fear of failure. We're scared, and most of the time it's not about us being hurt physically or sometimes financially. It's more how we're going to be hurt emotionally, right? And that's just a thought. That's what we allow it to happen, right? I try something. Of course, I have to make sure that I'm not betting the family farm on it, right? That I go for options that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. That's always a hell yes decision. A hell no decision is small upside if it actually works, big downside if it doesn't, right? But when I'm thinking about upside and downside, I want to see, like, what is the upside? Wealth, health, and happiness, right? What's the best case, worst case upside? What's the best case, worst case downside? And when I'm starting to clarify that in my mind, and I say, what am I really afraid of? Yeah. And most of the time, it's really how I'm going to feel or how I think others will feel about me. And those are just assumptions that can be challenged and should be challenged.
Well, I know that we're wrapping up in got just a couple of minutes here, and I really feel like we barely scratched the surface. There's so many just golden nuggets that you've already shared, and just so much more wealth of knowledge that you have. And so I would love just to, well, first of all, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up and close?
Yeah, I think that the last one I didn't mention in detail is about the fear of success, and it's actually more common than what we think, right? Think about that as, why would we fear success? And there's generally two things that are very interesting about it. If you look at somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, right? Very successful. Do you think you'd be willing to put in the hard work and take those decisions that they have had to do to become that successful? So it's that fear of hard work, and it's a fear of risk that often blocks us. That becomes the fear of success, is we assume it would take tremendous hard work. It would take tremendous sacrifices, right, to become successful. And judging ourselves and saying, I don't think I can do that. But again, it's like the other fears, is once you're clear on what are you actually afraid of, then you can check and challenge that to say, is there a way of achieving, maybe not close to what they've achieved, but can I 10x my improvement or 10x my life in a way that doesn't require that much hard work or doesn't require me to take decisions that might be reckless. Yes, it might involve risk, but not being reckless. So that's the first part. The second part, I think, why we are afraid of success is about who will we lose on that journey. And you often find that, right? People that become very successful suddenly find that they are not cutting off friendships. Friends are cutting it off with them because they feel like, they no longer belong in the same world together. So again, just write down what exactly are you afraid of will happen, and then try to see how can I maintain that, right? So have that discussion with friends and family to say, listen, I'm embarking on this journey. There's going to be a couple of outcomes. One could be that I become massively successful. I never want to compromise our relationship, right? And I'm going to be looking to you guys to keep me grounded, right? And you'll find that most of these successful people have got those friends around with them that don't know that they are Taylor Swift, right? That will keep them grounded, right? So I think it's like with all the fears, is try to be very clear about what are you afraid of. Is that really what can happen? Because we often exaggerate the worst case scenario. And even if that is true, what can we do today to reduce or maybe even eliminate those risks?
Yeah, that was something that I had really discovered a few years ago, this fear of success, and not even recognizing what it was specifically. For my own example again, says, I don't think that I'm afraid of making mistakes or the fear of failure. So what is that limiting belief, or what's that obstacle that's holding me back? And exactly what you said, it's fear of losing maybe someone, or for me, it was that sense of peace that I had created in my life. And it's almost a comfort for me to know that I have a rhythm and that I can, in a sense, control my outcomes. And so it gives me this sense of peace, like a sense of control. So if I was to give up that to pursue this, I might lose that sense of, stability within my own self. And that feels uncomfortable, because then that would mean I'd have to be a little bit messy within myself. And that comes, it's just been really incredible to watch that process, because it then comes to that perfectionism and different things that get in the way. So when I ask myself this question, this impossible question, what can I do to amplify or, increase my impact, I can now look through these lenses of, okay, what are those things that I know in the past have held me back from really going for it when I do see a solution, or I do see these things I want to achieve that are in the impossible, identifying those limiting things that want to just hang on to me and keep me there. I can now challenge those. And you've given some wonderful examples of how to challenge those. So I still hear that voice, really? So yes, I think, just recognizing as we're setting these impossible goals and being able to recognize what might be those things that'll start to creep up and get in the way of us really wanting to implement those things, that these are the tools that can help us to really, achieve that, growth
I
that we
think
want.
that's a great summary. It's sort of full circle as where we started, right? It all starts with setting those goals for yourself, for your life, for your business. That is not just ambitious as stretch goals, but are goals that you might consider to be impossible. And to ask, it's impossible unless. And sometimes the unless conditions might be that I'm in a relationship where I'm not getting the support, where I'm being held back, where we've separated over time. It could be a romantic relationship, it could be a business relationship, right? But setting that goal helps us to find out what are those limiting assumptions and beliefs, what are those limiting conditions that I would need to overcome to achieve that. It really helps me to focus on those few things that can make a big difference in my life.
Well, I just really appreciate you just taking your time and just sharing your insights and really giving some valuable tools to the women who are a part of the IWC organization, and the viewers that watch Leadership Lab. And where can they find more about you? Are you social media, website? I know you have an app as well. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
My handle for everything is just Dr. Alan Barnard, AlanBarnard, Dr. Alan Barnard. So I have a YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I also have a website, dralanbarnard.com, where you can read up more about it. But there are a lot of information on the YouTube channels and the social media. And I think it's very excitingly, we talked about a potential partnership of diving a little bit deeper into these ideas that we discussed and doing maybe a webinar in the future together. So that would be probably a really good way of getting more knowledge and being able to apply it as part of a challenge, maybe to your own life, to your own business.
Yes, I think that would be wonderful. So, ladies, we would love to hear from you. Would you be interested for us to put a 3-day, I think we were talking about doing a 3-day webinar challenge where we can really dive into some practical strategies and make some, actionable steps to implement some of these concepts that we talked about today. So let us know. You put them in here in the comments, reach out to me directly, Instagram, LinkedIn. Those are great ways to reach me. Again, Dr. Barnard, thank you so much for your time. This has been rich, and I'm sure the ladies are just going to get some incredible value from being able to hear what you have shared today. So thank you again.
Thank you so much again for the invitation, Sarah.